Imagine a castle with many gates. Some gates open to the market, others to the keep. Some are for servants, some for nobles. Each gate has a different set of guards and a different level of scrutiny. Now imagine an intruder outside the walls. The intruder's goal is not necessarily to smash the main gate. Often it's easier and far more effective to find a small service gate, pick its lock, and then move through the castle from the kitchens into the servants' corridors and finally into the treasury. Each time the intruder moves from corridor to corridor, they're crossing a trust boundary, and at some points, they're trying to escalate their privilege, to go from guest to chef, to steward to treasurer. This video will follow that exact narrative inside modern systems. We'll walk step by step through how attackers cross boundaries, how they build footholds, and how they escalate privileges. We'll do it in a way that's precise but intuitive. You should come away with a mental map you can use when you look at your own architecture. Let's start with the flow. Attackers typically follow. The high-level sequence is reconnaissance, then initial access, then foothold or persistence, then lateral movement, then privilege escalation, finally objective, exfiltration, sabotage, etc. Think of it as a path with checkpoints. Each checkpoint corresponds to a trust boundary in your system. The attacker's job is to find weaknesses in those boundaries and use them to progress. Reconnaissance is the map-making stage. Attackers learn what's on the network, which services exist, what versions they run, what endpoints are exposed, and where sensitive assets live. They probe APIs for unusual endpoints, scan for open ports, inspect public repos for leaked keys, and collect metadata from cloud services. This stage is noisy and low risk for the attacker, but it yields the coordinates for the rest of the operation. From a defender's perspective, reconnaissance looks like unusual scanning patterns, failed auth attempts, or requests to odd endpoints, things you should log and alert on. Initial access is where attackers first cross a boundary. This is often achieved via common techniques: phishing, that steals credentials, exploitation of a public vulnerability like a SQL injection or remote code execution, supply chain compromise that injects malicious code into a CI pipeline, or exploiting misconfigured cloud storage. Importantly, initial access rarely grants full control. It tends to give a very specific, constrained capability, a single user account, the ability to upload files, or the ability to execute code in a particular context. Even those small capabilities are dangerous because they're footholds. A foothold means the attacker has code execution or access within one trust zone. They then work to persist to make that foothold durable so they can return. Persistence mechanisms vary: adding a service account, implanting a backdoor, creating cron jobs, or abusing scheduled tasks that run with higher privileges. Persistence is also where attackers often look to broaden their footprint, configuring additional access or installing tools to help enumerate the environment from the inside. With persistence established, attackers attempt lateral movement. Lateral movement is precisely what it sounds like, moving across adjacent trust boundaries to reach more valuable zones. Mechanically, this looks like reusing credentials to log into a different service, exploiting an unpatched internal API, using stolen tokens to call internal microservices, or leveraging misconfigured network policies to reach a database. Each lateral step leverages some weakness, often an assumption or a misconfiguration in the boundary that separates two components. Privilege escalation sits at the heart of this story. There are two types to keep in mind: vertical and horizontal. Vertical escalation is climbing the privilege ladder, turning a low-privilege user into an admin. Horizontal escalation is gaining access to an equally privileged user, but in a more valuable context. For example, moving from a developer account to a database account with broader read rights. Attackers use many methods for escalation, exploiting software flaws that allow arbitrary code execution as a more privileged user, abusing misconfigured file permissions, manipulating token services to mint tokens with higher scopes, or stealing secrets that grant broader access. Let's pause and look at some concrete patterns attackers follow to escalate privileges. One common pattern is credential harvesting and replay. If code or configuration leaks display platform credentials, those credentials can often be reused to access other systems. Another pattern is token abuse in federated identity systems. An attacker who can trick an STS security token service into issuing a token for a more privileged role can suddenly perform actions that were previously denied. A third pattern is abusing unattended automation. CI/CD runners frequently have broad access, and if an attacker can push a malicious build or hijack a runner, they gain whatever privileges that automation had. A very common real-world technique is to find a chain of small mistakes that together let you pivot. For instance, an exposed debug endpoint accepts a file upload, boundary 1. The processing service that consumes uploads runs with elevated privileges, boundary 2, and the processing logic does not validate inputs properly. The attacker crafts a payload that triggers remote code execution in the processing service. Suddenly, a single initial crossing, uploading a file, turns into full control of a higher privilege service. Attackers love chaining simple failures like Lego blocks. From the defender's perspective, the crucial insight is that every lateral move and elevation requires some boundary to be bypassed. If you harden each boundary, reduce privileges, add verification, and instrument crossings, you raise the effort required for the attacker and increase the chance they're detected. That's the fundamental defense-in-depth trade-off. So what practical controls stop crossing and escalation? First, contain the blast radius. Segment your networks and services so that a compromise of one workload doesn't immediately allow access to the whole fleet. Micro-segmentation and strict network policies make lateral movement costlier. Second, use least privilege and just-in-time JIT access. Avoid standing powerful credentials. Prefer ephemeral tokens and require approval or machine attestations for privilege elevation. Third, harden identity flows. Use multi-factor authentication for interactive access. Require strong cryptographic authentication between services and LS, and ensure token issuers enforce audience and scope checks. Fourth, protect automation and CI/CD. Treat build systems as high-risk pillars, restrict what runners can access, sign artifacts, and require reproducible builds. Fifth, monitor and alert on abnormal flows. Lateral movement often shows up as odd login patterns, new service account usage, or requests to internal-only endpoints. Use behavioral baselines and EDR to spot them. There's also a class of defenses that focus on breaking attack chains rather than individual techniques. Example, runtime defenses such as SQL filtering and container capability removal make many privilege elevation exploits fail because the exploit cannot access required syscalls or permissions. Immutable infrastructure and signed images mean an attacker's injected artifact is less likely to be accepted by deployment pipelines. Another approach is deception. Honeypots and canaries can detect attackers early by offering attractive but monitored targets that should never see legitimate traffic. We should also talk about post-exploitation resilience. Assume an attacker will get in. Design for detection and quick containment. For example, enforce network egress rules so stolen credentials can't be immediately used to exfiltrate data. Use data loss prevention to block sensitive exports, and prepare playbooks to revoke credentials and rotate keys rapidly. Short-lived credentials make stolen tokens less useful, and automated revocation reduces the manual friction of response. One subtle point: privilege escalation is not just a technical problem, it's organizational. Overprivileged service accounts, unclear ownership, and emergency access that never gets revoked are human failures that create the technical opportunities attackers exploit. Regular access reviews, automated policy as code, and tight change management reduce this human surface area. To ground this, imagine a short story. An attacker phishes a junior developer and gets access to their laptop. The laptop has cached credentials for the company's container registry. From the registry, the attacker discovers a misconfigured CI job that uses a powerful service account to deploy test builds. The attacker crafts a malicious artifact, uploads it, and triggers the CI pipeline. The pipeline, runs the artifact with that service account, and the attacker now has tokens to call internal APIs, including a database read role. The chain: phishing, cached creds, CI abuse, privilege escalation, data access. Each step is a crossing of a boundary, small, individually survivable mistakes that together become a compromise. So what should you do tomorrow? Here's a prioritized checklist. Identify high-value boundaries, CI/CD, token services, database admin APIs, and secret stores. Rotate and remove long-lived credentials. Move to short-lived tokens and ephemeral sessions. Enforce MFA for human access and require machine attestations for service-to-service auth. Harden CI/CD, least privilege runners, artifact signing, restrict network access, and require review gates. Implement micro-segmentation and zero-trust networking. Treat internal traffic as untrusted until proven otherwise. Apply runtime hardening, drop container capabilities, use comp, and run as non-root. Instrument crossings, logs, correlation IDs, alerts for unusual service-to-service calls. Practice incident response with tabletop exercises that specifically simulate lateral movement and privilege escalation. To finish, remember the castle analogy. A single open service gate, an unattended key, or a forgotten back door is all an attacker needs to gradually climb into the treasury. The good news is that by making boundaries explicit, minimizing the privileges that cross them, and watching crossings closely, you make that climb far harder and far more likely to fail or be detected.